made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Behind closed doors. And I've no intention. I've started to stop now. I'm determined to put an end to this.
No one in the room at Windsor Castle understood why Prince William suddenly stopped mid-action. Before him lay a sealed file delivered following a parliamentary review. Catherine sat nearby, silent. William read the first page. Then he turned back and read it again, as if to ensure he hadn't misread it. Then silence. No shouting. No outburst of anger. Just a silence so prolonged it made the atmosphere in the room heavy. For within that file lay a discovery capable of shaking the very inner workings of the royal household. 3 royal decrees concerning Queen Camilla's private office were flagged as irregular. Some signatures showed signs of alteration. The authorization dates did not match official records. The seal logs did not align with King Charles's schedule. And more alarmingly, these 3 decrees had not appeared all at once. They spanned several months. This forced William to confront a terrifying possibility. This might not be a simple clerical error. Someone might have possessed sufficient access, confidence, and time to manipulate the system from the shadows. If you want to follow every detail of this story, subscribe to the channel now, because what William discovered next was far more serious. I'd also love to know where you're watching from today. Please leave your city or country below. I always enjoy seeing our community connecting from all over the world. William continued turning the pages. Then he paused at a detail that instantly turned his suspicions into alarm. According to the records, King Charles had supposedly personally authorized these decrees. Yet when cross-referenced with his official schedule, Charles had been elsewhere performing royal duties at those exact times. In other words, on paper, the king's authority had been exercised. But the king might never have been present to grant that authority. And now only one question remained. If Charles did not sign those decrees, then who exercised his power? And from that moment on, William realized he could not simply stop at the initial summaries. He pulled the folder of supporting materials closer and began to scrutinize every appendix, every note, and every scope of authority attached to the 3 decrees. The deeper he delved, the more alarming the picture became. These documents concerned far more than mere administrative procedures. They appeared to grant Camilla's household temporary control over sensitive decisions regarding the royal collection, matters of access, ceremonial permissions, and other issues that would normally be subject to a rigorous system of checks and controls. William slowed his reading. At first, he viewed everything through the mindset of a future king. If the sovereign's authority had indeed been exercised without explicit approval, this was not merely an internal office matter. It raised questions about the integrity of the crown, about whether decisions made in the king's name could still be trusted. But then William saw a name: Princess Diana. One of the contested decrees affected access rights and ceremonial permissions regarding artifacts associated with his mother. And from that moment, everything changed. William was no longer reading simply as the man destined to succeed to the throne. He was reading as a son. Memories he had thought laid to rest in the past came flooding back. Diana, Charles, Camilla, the years of pain, and a lifetime spent trying to balance his royal duties with his love for his mother. If someone had truly used the king's authority to interfere with decisions regarding Diana's legacy without proper authorization, then for William, it was no longer just an institutional breach. It became something far more personal. Catherine remained by his side. She did not interrupt while he read, nor did she press him for a reaction. She did not specify whom he should confront. She simply waited for William to look up. Then Catherine asked a very brief question. "Does Charles know?" William did not answer immediately. For that single question opened up 2 equally alarming possibilities. If Charles did not know, it meant the king's authority had been exercised without the king's own permission. But if Charles did know, then the matter went far beyond Camilla's household. It would strike at the very heart of the monarchy. William turned back to the file, searching for an answer within the timeline. And there he came across an event from a few months earlier, an incident that at the time might have seemed like nothing more than an internal disagreement, but now took on an entirely different significance. For before Parliament discovered these irregular decrees, someone within the royal family had already sensed that something was amiss. Someone who knew Charles well enough to recognize that the document before her did not resemble the way he typically authorized major changes. That person was Princess Anne. The mention of Princess Anne in the report took William's mind back to a night several months earlier, before the situation had been labeled a scandal, before the forensic review, and before 3 specific decrees had come under scrutiny. That evening at a private Windsor Heritage reception, the atmosphere within the castle was entirely routine. King Charles was away on royal duty, and William and Catherine had already departed. As the reception wound down, Anne was the most senior royal remaining at Windsor. Then late that night, a document was delivered to the household office. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a routine administrative authorization. But as Anne read through it, she immediately sensed something was amiss. The document authorized the temporary transfer of control over certain decisions regarding the royal collection to staff within Camilla's household. The scope was remarkably broad, wide enough to allow that team to intervene in decisions that would normally require multiple layers of review. Anne read the document once, just once. Then she ordered a halt to its implementation. It wasn't because she had proof the document was a forgery. It was because Anne knew Charles too well. She knew her brother rarely approved such sweeping changes without demanding a legal review, secondary confirmation, and additional layers of scrutiny. Yet the document before her had moved too quickly. It was too broad and too easy. Anne placed her finger on the line, indicating sovereign authorization. She made it clear that she would not endorse, acknowledge, or permit the decree to proceed until Charles personally confirmed that it was indeed his decision. Before long, word that Anne had blocked the document seemed to reach Camilla. Later that night, Queen Camilla met with Anne in person. Camilla explained that the decree was intended solely to address a temporary administrative issue. In her view, Anne was turning a routine procedure into a personal question of trust. But Anne did not engage in a lengthy argument. Nor did she accuse Camilla. Anne simply laid down one very straightforward condition. If Charles had indeed approved the decree, then let Charles say so himself. Just a direct confirmation. That was all that was needed. And it was at that precise moment that the atmosphere seemed to shift. Camilla did not answer immediately. She remained silent for a few seconds. She did not offer to call Charles. She did not suggest that Anne could verify it right then and there. She offered no further proof regarding the authorization sitting on the table. After that brief silence, Camilla left the room. As far as Anne was concerned, the matter might well have ended there. She had blocked the document and lodged a formal objection in the system. By the next morning, Charles could easily confirm or reject it. But months later, when parliamentary investigators revisited that night and examined the digital trail, they discovered something that took the entire affair to a whole new level. For about 40 minutes after Anne had formally lodged her objection, someone accessed the registry, and Princess Anne's objection vanished. And it was precisely that detail that caused the investigation to take a completely different turn. For if a formal objection from Princess Anne had indeed existed, but vanished from the permanent registry, the issue went beyond merely a questionable decree. It touched upon the history of the crown itself. When the parliamentary review team began a digital forensic analysis, investigators went back to examine the entire registry concerning that night at Windsor. They searched for the objection. Anne had raised an objection that should have been preserved as part of the permanent institutional record. But they could not find it. Instead, the official records revealed a completely different sequence of events. According to the registry, the decree had been received. It was then processed. And most importantly, the records indicated that the document had passed through the system without challenge, without any objection from a senior member of the royal family. That did not align with Anne's recollection, nor did it match the accounts of those present that night. So, the investigators dug deeper. They turned their attention to the backup servers, and it was there that traces began to emerge. An earlier version of the registry still contained a record of Anne's objection. System data showed that the entry had been altered after its initial creation. The interval between Anne's formal objection and the modification of the registry, it was approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes, not days later, not after a protracted legal review, just 40 minutes after Anne had demanded that Charles confirm the matter personally. From that point on, the investigators were no longer merely questioning the validity of the decree. They began to ask a far more serious question. Who had altered the records? Access logs quickly led them to a specific access code. That code did not belong to a temporary staff member or a low-level assistant. It was registered to a senior household official working directly within Camilla's private office. This changed the entire nature of the matter. The sequence of events now became clearer. An authorization appeared. Anne grew suspicious and blocked it. She demanded sovereign confirmation. Camilla confronted Anne, and about 40 minutes later, the objection vanished from the historical record. From this point on, the question was no longer whether there had been a clerical error. The question was whether someone had deliberately tried to make it appear for posterity that Anne had never raised an objection. And if so, was that person acting alone? Or were they protecting a more significant decision? How much did Camilla know? Did someone order the registry to be altered? Or did that senior official take it upon themselves to protect Camilla's household? But there was one more detail that caused investigators even greater concern. A total of 3 disputed decrees had surfaced over the course of several months. Anne had only stumbled upon one of them while it was being processed. The other 2 decrees had passed through the system, unblocked, unchallenged. No questions were raised at the time. And this raised a far more alarming possibility. If Anne's objection could be erased within 40 minutes, how many other traces had vanished before investigators could uncover them? By the time the full forensic trail was assembled and laid before King Charles, the crisis had expanded well beyond the confines of Camilla's household. Charles now faced a scenario no monarch ever wishes to see. On the table before him lay documents bearing his own signature. Yet, as he was about to tell his advisors, he had never approved them. And when that dossier was finally placed before King Charles, the matter was no longer merely a technical question. It had become a crisis that struck at the very heart of both his authority and his private life. Charles sat alone in a quiet area of the palace. Before him lay a parliamentary brief pages of documents arranged in sequence, accompanied by forensic findings and records revealing irregularities that could not be explained away as a simple administrative error. He read slowly. At one point, Charles removed his glasses and placed them carefully beside the file. Then he asked his private secretary a single question. "Has William seen the whole thing?" The answer came immediately. Yes, William had received the full unredacted report. Charles did not react explosively. He did not slam his hand on the table. He did not call Camilla in. He did not demand an immediate explanation from anyone. He simply closed his eyes for a few seconds and exhaled slowly. And it was precisely that silence that revealed the true weight of what he had just read. For decades, Charles had devoted a vast portion of his life to securing Camilla's position. He had weathered public opposition. He had endured immense pressure from the press. He had faced tensions within his own family. All of this so that Camilla could finally stand beside him in a recognized role. Yet now Camilla's own private office was under scrutiny for having exercised authority in Charles's name. Authority he may never have sanctioned. Elsewhere in the palace, Camilla was reportedly waiting. Aides had prepared talking points. Legal strategies had been outlined. But Camilla did not want scripted words. She wanted to see Charles in person. Yet the summons never came, and that silence gradually became the clearest message of all. Charles no longer viewed this as a dispute between husband and wife. He was treating it as a matter concerning the crown. A legal secretary then outlined the fundamental principle: a royal decree is valid only when the monarch has genuinely ratified it. If the authorization was fabricated, reconstructed, or expanded beyond what the sovereign had agreed to, then any authority derived from that document might no longer hold water. Charles picked up the first decree. He read the section regarding the transfer of discretion. Then he paused. Its scope was far too broad. Given Charles's typical reaction to such matters, he made it clear that he would never have sanctioned such a transfer without a rigorous secondary review. And from that moment on, the choice facing him became so brutal that there was virtually no turning back. If Charles tried to protect Camilla at all costs, he risked casting even greater doubt on the integrity of the crown. But if he accepted the findings in full and acted upon them, the very woman he had shielded for decades would be thrust into the center of an unprecedented investigation. It was no longer a choice between family and public opinion. It was a choice between Camilla and the authority of the throne itself. Charles looked down at the file one last time. Then he made his decision. And there was one detail that made that choice colder than any other. He did not consult Camilla first. And once Charles had made his decision, things began to move very quickly. There were no drawn-out arguments. There was no heated confrontation between him and Camilla. Instead, documents were dispatched, powers were suspended, and orders were issued with such speed that the entire palace machinery shifted instantly. Charles signed a formal restriction order. The first clause froze all 3 disputed decrees. All authority derived from those decrees was immediately suspended. Related permissions and access rights were also halted pending the completion of a full independent investigation. But Charles did not stop there. He proceeded to tighten the system of control. From that moment on, Camilla's private household was no longer permitted to handle royal decrees independently as before. Any future authorization had to pass through the king's direct verification system. This meant that any power previously exercised based on internal trust now required direct confirmation. There was no room for ambiguity, no scope for personal interpretation, no place for vague approvals. And it was precisely this that affected Camilla the most. She was not consulted before the order was signed. She was not summoned to explain herself. There was no opportunity to negotiate, no time to prepare a personal response to Charles. By the time the notification reached her, the decisions were already final. Camilla had reportedly braced herself for anger. She might have expected a confrontation. She might have anticipated a barrage of difficult questions from Charles. But what she did not expect was for him to bypass her entirely. Charles did not argue. He simply acted. Camilla did not scream. There was no violent reaction. She simply sat in silence. That very silence signaled her understanding that this was no longer a dispute that could be resolved behind closed doors. At the same time, a forensic preservation order was issued. Staff within Camilla's household were instructed to preserve everything: access records, correspondence logs, internal schedules, system histories. Nothing was to be deleted. Nothing was to be amended. No data potentially relevant to the review was to be altered. From that point on, the palace machinery began to operate with an unprecedented level of control. Legal advisors prepared the necessary documents for an annulment. Archivists revisited every entry in the registry, cross-referencing original versions against altered ones. The altered records were not destroyed. They were retained as evidence. Security teams also began reviewing months of access logs, searching for unusual logins, unexplained changes, and any traces that might relate to the 2 remaining decrees. And the more they examined the records, the harder it became to ignore a single question. Were these 3 documents truly all there was? Or were they merely the first ones to be discovered? Meanwhile, on the outside, no one could see the tension mounting behind the palace walls. Charles maintained his public schedule. Royal duties continued. Ceremonies proceeded as usual. Outwardly, everything appeared stable, but within power was being locked down. Records were under scrutiny and every digital trace was being dragged back into the light. That quiet did not last long, for by the next morning, what had previously existed only in secret files began to appear in the newspapers, and a private crisis within the palace was poised to erupt before the entire nation. By the following morning, the silence that had enveloped the palace was finally shattered. What had previously existed only in internal reports began to surface in London's newspapers. Headlines quickly zeroed in on 3 phrases the public could not ignore: forged royal authority, a compromised decree system, and the possibility that the sovereign's power had been wielded within the machinery of the crown itself without valid authorization. Within hours, the issue had moved beyond the closed doors of Windsor or Buckingham Palace. Broadcasters repeatedly invited constitutional experts to analyze the gravity of a royal decree being tampered with. News programs questioned where the royal family's internal control systems had failed, and almost immediately Camilla became the focal point. The public began to ask, what did she know? When did she know it? And just how far had those in her private office been allowed to go? Crowds began to gather outside Buckingham Palace, not for a ceremony, not for a celebration, but to see how the palace would respond to a scandal directly involving the king's authority. Yet, while the public outcry grew louder outside, a very different kind of meeting was taking place within the palace. No cameras, no reporters, no public statements. King Charles sat with Prince William, Princess Anne, Camilla, and Catherine. The atmosphere in the room was heavier than during any previous confrontation. On the table lay the registry restored by forensic teams and archivists. Charles placed it down before them. An entry that had once vanished had now reappeared. It was Princess Anne's original objection. The note of dissent Anne had lodged that night at Windsor was now officially restored to the permanent historical record. No one could erase it from history again, but restoring the records was only the first step. The senior household official implicated in the digital alteration was permanently dismissed from royal service. The decision was decisive. No temporary suspension, no reassignment, no chance of return. Then came the 3 disputed decrees. All 3 were annulled. Any authority derived from them was rendered void. At the same time, the autonomy of Camilla's household was further curtailed to an unprecedented degree. William said little. He looked at the restored registry. He gazed at the entries that just months earlier had nearly been erased from history. Then he closed the file, a small gesture. Yet it did not feel like an ending, for William knew there was still an unresolved issue. Princess Anne had managed to block only one of the 3 decrees. The other 2 documents had gone undetected when they first appeared. They had been processed, they had been executed, and they had been archived as if entirely legitimate. It was only when forensic investigators re-examined the system that the irregularities came to light. This meant that for a time, these 2 decrees had existed within the system without anyone stopping them. And if those 2 documents could slip past every layer of control, the final question became more unsettling than anything that had come before. 3 decrees had been found. 1 objection had been restored. 1 senior official had been dismissed. But was that truly the whole story? Or somewhere within other registries, other access logs, other archive permissions? Did there still remain documents that no one had yet discovered? And it was precisely that question that prevented William from viewing the closing of the file as the end of the matter. 3 decrees had been uncovered. An objection raised by Princess Anne had been upheld. A senior official had been removed from royal service. Yet those decisions addressed only what had come to light. What William now faced was the part that remained in the shadows. The first and most difficult question still centered on Camilla. How much did she truly know? Camilla's defenders could well argue that a large private household involves multiple layers of staff and authority. A senior official might have overstepped their assigned mandate. Camilla would not necessarily track every operational detail access log or registry amendment. In theory, that was possible, but the issue lay in the night Anne blocked the decree at Windsor. When Princess Anne demanded that Charles personally confirm the authorization, Camilla showed no surprise at the document's contents. She did not ask where the decree had originated. She did not ask for it to be brought back for review. She did not suggest that staff might have misunderstood an instruction. Nor did she offer to contact Charles immediately to dispel any doubts. Instead, Camilla remarked that Anne was turning an administrative procedure into a personal issue of trust. It was that very reaction that left the question mark hanging. It was not enough to conclude that Camilla had directly issued orders to anyone. Yet it was not enough to make all suspicions vanish either. Then there were the remaining 2 decrees. The parliamentary summary described them only in broad terms: temporary access, permissions, ceremonial scheduling authority. These terms sounded administrative, yet they failed to fully reveal how those powers had been exercised, for how long, or what decisions they had influenced. Anne had simply happened to be in the right place at the right time to block one of the decrees, yet 2 other decrees passed through the system without encountering any obstacles. That is precisely what is concerning. For if an irregular document can be processed, executed, and archived as a valid decision, the issue lies not only with the person who created it. It also lies with a system that failed to raise questions early enough. And this gives rise to a third question. Is this the action of a single individual, or is it a sign of a culture that has long been in place? The senior official involved in altering the registry possessed more than just an access code. That person had the clearance to enter the system. They had the knowledge to know exactly which entry needed changing. And more importantly, the confidence to carry it out a mere 40 minutes after Anne had raised an objection. That confidence compelled investigators to cast a wider net. Who else knew? Who saw the changes but asked no questions? Who had handled the documents previously? And were there other, more subtle alterations, ones never significant enough to trigger a review? For William, these questions carried particular weight. This was not merely an issue he would have to resolve as a future king. It touched Diana, it touched Charles, it touched Camilla, and it touched the very system William might one day be responsible for safeguarding. Catherine understood this. She did not encourage William to turn the matter into a personal vendetta. Instead, she reminded him of something more important. If an institution is to survive, it must be capable of self-scrutiny, even when the truth proves painful for those closest to the seat of power. Princess Anne, too, became a crucial part of that lesson. Anne did not need to know the full story of that night at Windsor. She simply needed to spot an irregularity and refuse to turn a blind eye. Had Anne not been present that evening, the decree might well have been accepted without a single formal objection. And that was the most sobering thought of all. An invalid document need not exist forever to wreak havoc. It only needs to exist long enough. long enough for another staff member to cite it, long enough for a new decision to be based upon it, long enough for it to become a precedent, and then precedent hardens into practice, and at some point, a practice can come to be viewed as an established authority. That is perhaps the most significant takeaway from this entire saga. Power must not only be entrusted to the right person, it must also be properly documented and subject to scrutiny, and there must always be someone with the courage to question things when a seemingly routine procedure begins to overstep its bounds. After all, an institution rarely loses public trust over a single mistake. Trust is usually eroded when minor irregularities are overlooked for too long. William could have simply closed the file. Charles could have revoked the 3 decrees. Anne could have withdrawn her objection from the permanent historical record. Yet one question remains weighing heavier than any of the decisions just signed. If these are the only 3 decrees that have come to light, how many other documents are still lurking in the shadows? I would love to hear your perspective. Do you think Camilla was truly unaware of what was happening within her private office, or do these revelations suggest a much wider issue? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. And before you go, let us know which city or country you are watching from. It is fascinating to see people interested in the royal family connecting from all corners of the globe. If you wish to keep following the details, records, and unanswered questions from behind palace walls, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next update.